This episode is made possible by our generous patrons. To learn more, visit patreon.com/ink2film.
Welcome to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book.
And then see the movie.
I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss J.K. Rowling's 1997 fantasy novel, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Expecto! Patronum! Expecto!
Here we are. It's a big one. Harry Potter. We're finally getting to it. I know this is a big project for you, James. So I just wanted to get into reasons for why this is so important to you, and why maybe also why we've taken so long to get to it. We can touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, this is one of those projects where it's near and dear to my heart, but this story helped shape me as a person in a lot of ways. For one reason, at least, it's the reason why I enjoy reading. I wouldn't be the reader that I am without Harry Potter. It hit all the right boxes at all the right times in my life. I've read this series more than any other series. It's just it couldn't be more near and dear to my heart. And then just as I grew up, it became more and more popular, and more people, I was able to create connections and make friends with people just because we had shared, knowledge of this story, and had basically gone through these journeys together with these characters. And so yeah, it's a massive one.
I think that's something I want to try and explore as we cover this. I want to try and figure out what it is about Harry Potter that makes it so foundational for people, and what it is that children or young people really attached to, and why it was so powerful in their lives. Because your experience is not unique. That's something we reached out to our listeners, and we got some people who responded about what it means to them. And a lot of people said that they got it young, that it was, whether it was a gift or they found it or whatever, in the library or whatever it was, and how it just really built them as it's essential. It's a vital part to who they are, like you said. So, I want to try and figure out why that is. So. But yeah, why do we take so long to get to it?
So I'm not really sure. I think it had something to do with the massive popularity and how widespread all of the coverage of Harry Potter has been.
And I think that's it for me. I was hesitant to do it because it's been done so much. I've kind of come around on that thinking, because I've come to believe that we bring something unique, and that our style of coverage and our personal experience with it is going to be different. And so if people follow this podcast, they're going to be interested to know our take on this novel, regardless of the fact that there's a million other people out there who've covered it, right? Mm-hmm. And that does kind of address something else about it. We're going to do it in our way, but what we can't do is cover everything that's been said about Harry Potter, because we could have this podcast about Harry Potter for the rest of our lives, and we'd never be able to do it. It's one of the most analyzed piece of work in all of literature, I would argue. It's definitely one of the most widely read. And because of that, you have a million different takes, a million different angles. People have taken all sorts of different lenses in which to view this text. And that stuff's all fascinating to me, but it's kind of, I think the enormity of it was kind of intimidating too, right? I wanted to figure out, how are we going to do it? And so I come back down to, we're going to give our takes, right? Our personal experience with it, and then what I can sort of prize out of the text with my background in writing, and just kind of tackle it like it's any other project, and try and pretend like there isn't this larger Potterverse going on, in which we're a very, very small drop in a pond of, right?
Yeah, and I do want to say that this is because I read this so many times. I would read it. When I was first reading it, not many of them were out. I think the first two were out when I was reading. And I would read through one, read through the other one, and then just restart and just continuously reread. So the crazy knowledge that I had of this, although I probably don't have all of it anymore, I do want to bring some of that to the table. And I think that there's a lot of things, this one's a little more simplified, but I think as we go, it gets a lot more complicated. But something that I do want to ask is your history with it, because I know that you're fairly new to it. You didn't catch it when you were younger.
Yeah, so we should also say we are covering just the first book here. It's not going to be the entirety of the series. This is going to be the first book, and then we're going to follow it up with the first movie, and then we're going to move on for a little while, and then we will return to the Harry Potter universe at some point. But yeah, so personally, I was the kind of kid who wanted to read above my age range all the time. That became like a weird goal of mine. I think it was tied to these like book club things in school where you would have to test. You'd have to test out of your age range in order to access like a higher level of book in like the age category. And I was obsessed with trying to read at a higher level than I was. And I was always at the upper end of it until I think pretty early on I basically unlocked like high school level books, right?
Right, yeah.
And so I was so into that idea. And then I found Dragonlance was my sort of like young fantasy thing I was obsessed with. And once I got into that and like Forgotten Realms, there's 100 of those novels. So there's so many of them that you can read by all kinds of different authors. But mainly it was Dragonlance through the Chronicles series, Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. But yeah, so I was really into that. And then around that time, Harry Potter came out. And I remember my younger brother, Ben, got really into it. And at that point, I had kind of gotten to that level where I was very, very into reading adult books, or like at least older kid books. And I remember thinking Harry Potter is this kid's novel. Like it's a little kid novel. It's not for me.
Well, I mean, I guess we should also say that like you were like at the upper end of that age range anyway.
Right.
Like you would have been almost in your teens, right?
Yeah. Oh no, I was, because so it came to America in I believe in 99.
Right.
So I would have been 14. Yeah. So I was definitely at that age where I was trying to be like, I'm an adult now.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so Harry Potter wasn't cool. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like that was a little kid book. And so I never really got, and then what I ended up doing is I did see the movies, and I've seen the movies along the way. I think I missed the first few for a little while for that same reason, but then like it kind of became such a thing that it was like I couldn't avoid it. And I did love fantasy. And so I finally did watch the movies, and I liked them. I never went and picked up the books. And this novel I read about a year ago for the first time. And I read this one and the second one, or I guess it was over a year ago because it was before we started the podcast. I read the first one and the second one, and my plan was to go through and read them all. But I stopped because we started the podcast, and I said, well, wait a minute, I'm going to hold off because we might cover this. So that's maybe another reason why we haven't covered it, is because it was so fresh. I wanted to give it a little distance. But yeah, that's my weird, I guess other people might have had a similar experience.
I'm sure that people had that experience because when I got that age, there was plenty of things that came around that were coming up that I was like, that's too childish for me. Because like you say, you get to a certain point and you're like, well, like I had the same thing where like if you read at a certain level, they would give you higher level books, and then you felt like I loved that thing. Like it's kind of weird to look back at it now.
It's
but
like a badge of honor. I read at this level.
Yeah, but it's also a little weird that like if some kid who doesn't necessarily read at that level wants to read a book at a high school level, why not let him? Like it feels a little weird that they would be like, you can't read this until you're.
It is weird, and honestly, I don't know. I wonder how many of those programs still exist, and have they tweaked that at all? I would be curious to know if there are any parents out there or kids out there who might know the answer to that. I'm sure there is some sort of like pedagogy behind that and a theory for why it works the way that they want it to. I don't know. I'd be interested to know if that's been tweaked over time.
Yeah. And speaking of teaching, something that was like pretty punk rock to me about Harry Potter was the fact that it was getting banned all over the place. Oh,
yeah. Yeah. I definitely want to touch on that. Yeah. I mean, it was that actually was something that made me want to read it, because I remember it was my library at school. I think they weren't allowed to carry it. Like they couldn't have it in the library.
And I was like, and I read it, and like I remember reading it and then hearing that it was being banned, and I was like, what the fuck? I'm like, this is a great book.
Yeah.
You got to read it. And then like it became like this thing that I was like telling all my friends to read and stuff.
Yeah. It was these groups saying that it was trying to make witchcraft cool, which is actually Satan's dark art.
Right. Well, it's like D&D and stuff, right? Like it's like every generation has something where it's like this is where a bunch of people want to die on a hill because they don't want their kids to read about three-headed dogs.
Yeah. But that also reminds me. So I want to get into the history. One of the things. So this first novel I feel like is so iconic, and so everyone who loves Harry Potter knows the plot so well. We're gonna talk about that stuff, but I don't want to spend the entire episode on that. I do want to talk about J.K. Rowling and the story of her publishing this novel, and then also the story of the novel itself, its publication, people's reaction to it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I know a little bit of this, but I feel like I haven't heard it in a while. Oh, that's something else I should say, is that although I have reread these novels like countless times, this was my first time rereading the first one in probably 5 or 6 years. So it was like, it had been a while for me. So it was fun to go back.
Cool. We also have reached out to your listeners to get their houses. Because I want to know your house. Tell me your house. Because I'm kind of like, I want to get a picture for our listeners, like where they fall. And so far we've gotten a lot of Slytherin. We've gotten a few Gryffindors, I think a Hufflepuff or two. But not very many, honestly. But what I would like to do is get some more data points because I want to kind of tally it up. And then we have our houses that we're going to reveal, but I think we're going to save it for the sorting hat scene when we get to it because I think it'd be kind of fun to touch on that.
I have a lot of house-related thoughts to talk about when we get to that because I feel like there's some things that need to be said, especially in the first few books about different houses and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so if you're ready, I think let's get into J.K. Rowling and the history of her writing this novel and its publication, because I think it's very fascinating.
I wanted to ask you because I was just thinking of it during this read. I'm like, how is this the one that blew up and was the big? Because it feels like a lot of other novels, and it feels like she's really put a lot of stuff together to make this mega success.
You are asking the literal billion-dollar question. That publishing has been asking itself endlessly since this book took off, because everyone wants this, right? Every author wants this, every publisher wants this, especially in YA, fantasy. The Harry Potter shadow is long. It is huge.
I also think that it's like it happened at the perfect time. So I'm wondering if it's like it was based on time and it was like I don't think that anybody could replicate this specific thing. I think something else will blow up like this.
No, but you have seen like Hunger Games blow up, which is different, but you could argue similar in a lot of ways. So people are looking for the next big one to blow up because there will be another one. There will be another one that hasn't been written yet in the next few years that will blow up, that will become the new generation's novel, that young adult, that age where people are buying books and falling in love with them and forming really strong attachments that you just can't really do as an adult like you can do when you're that age.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what everybody wants, and a lot of YA authors dream of that, and a lot of YA publishers dream of publishing that novel. So that's why I want to talk about how this book came to be and her history. So J.K. Rowling's real name is Joanne Rowling. Did you know that her name was Joanne?
Yes.
Yeah. So Joanne took on the K to become J.K. Because the publisher wanted her to use a name that is more gender neutral to appeal to male readers, in an attempt to appeal to male readers, which is pretty common in publishing. It does happen.
I wonder if it's also the fantasy send up type thing because it's like J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis. Is that kind of like a fantasy thing?
It's a little bit of that, I think, but honestly, I think more it is a lot of women are encouraged to take initials to kind of do that, to make it seem like could be a man, could be a woman. I don't know. I'm going to read it. A lot of people do that. I would like to think that's changing these days, but honestly, I don't know. But we're getting ahead of it a little bit, so I want to talk a little about her life before she published this. So she grew up to parents that were never went to college, and she grew up on government assistance. Her parents were married when they were young. Her father was an aircraft engineer at Rolls-Royce, and her mother was a high school science technician. And from a young age, she did grow up around books and reading and storytelling, and she was convinced that the only thing she ever wanted to do was write novels. Both of her parents kind of treated it as a phase and kind of like a weird thing, and they thought she'd grow out of it because it was never going to pay the bills, which is a very common story for writers, and one I identified with at least a little bit. She said that she had a very tough time in her teenage years. She was very depressed and struggled in school. At 15, her mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and she would struggle with it for the next 10 years before she succumbed to the disease, which was before she sold Harry Potter.
I've heard that like a lot of death that was around her she ended up putting a lot of herself into these books, as I'm sure everyone knows. But I've heard that like losing her mother was kind of the moment where she was like, death was going to become essential to these stories.
Yeah, and that was at 25, which was when she was writing these, you know. But so she attended the University of Exeter, studied French and classics, which people have said that her classic knowledge was later used to come up with the names for the spells, a lot of Latin. After graduating, she did work for Amnesty International doing translations, which she found important. She would read hastily scribbled letters smuggled out of totalitarian regimes by men and women who were risking imprisonment to inform the outside world of what was happening to them. But eventually she moved on from that job. She found she was too disorganized for the career, even though she did think it was important. She said when she was in her office, all she ever liked about working in offices was that she could write stories when no one was looking. So she was constantly writing.
That's cool.
And so she has said that the initial idea for Harry Potter came when she was on a train that was delayed from Manchester to London's King Cross station. And she came up with the idea for Harry Potter. She said she had the idea of a scrawny, little, black-haired, bespectacled boy that was becoming more and more of a wizard to her. So really, that's all it was. It was a young boy who is a wizard. That's it. Seems like a pretty simple concept. And like you were touching on earlier, it's not necessarily the most original concept ever. You know what I mean? Like it's definitely kind of the hero's journey. You know what I mean? Like the idea of a boy who's a secret wizard. It's a very common trope in fantasy.
I think that where she shines is like with how she can take like all of these different elements, like you talked about before, using her Latin to make the spells, using her like knowledge of classical literature to shape certain aspects of characters and things that show up. I think that she's able to like blend it into this really well thought out universe that just like it's just like it's so endearing, where it's like everything you read you're like, I want to see that, I want to be there, I wish this was happening to me.
No, you're right. And I think I'm going to touch on that later, but I think mood and atmosphere is so important for these books. But yeah, so what you were touching on earlier is that when she did finally start writing it, her mother died during that. And it's sort of to cope with the pain, she has said that she transferred her anguish onto Harry and gave him this really dark, orphaned upbringing where there was a lot wrong in his life and he was going through a lot of pain about losing his parents. And then in 1993, had a child named Jessica. She became a mother. And then by November of that same year, separated from the father. So she became a single mother. She said that she was as poor as you could be and not be homeless, essentially. She was living off of government programs, supporting her child and trying to write. And she said that in that period of her life is some of the time she's actually the most proud of, looking back. And she wants to, she's continued in her stardom to support those sort of programs and champion government welfare programs, essentially, right? Like, and she really believes in them and has fought for them. So she was this single parent with a child and felt like that was a huge stigma at the time for her that she had to overcome. And during that period, she said that she seriously considered suicide. She was severely depressed and sought help for it and actually spoke with a therapist and was able to work through it. And then she also said that during that time, she used that experience with depression to describe the Dementors in Harry Potter. So they're sort of a manifestation of depression.
Mm-hmm. So I want to touch on the fact what you were talking about a second ago with her championing like the welfare programs and things like that. I've always had this J.K. Rowling to look at as this positive influence. And it's crazy because like throughout all this, like she helped shape me from these books. And then even now, like I go and I see her championing these things on Twitter or whatever it is. I'm always reading and she's always has great quotes. And it's just like, she seems like nicest human being, just like has been through everything and yet came out the other end of it just like super successful, writing this amazing book series, and then also, you know, not just like holing away in some house, some super huge mansion somewhere. She's like actively trying to help people. So I don't know, I look up to her a lot as an artist in general.
Yeah, and I think a lot of writers do. That's why I wanted to say a lot of this stuff is sort of like passed into myth and legend, because so many people like, it is the ultimate dream story. You know, you can compare a lot of dream stories in publishing, then there has been a lot of huge success stories. But J.K. Rowling's is, you know, it's the best one. It's the biggest one. It's true rags to riches. And through selling a story, through selling, you know, a novel. Like many other authors, she actually had to go through a lot of rejection. So it was the third, I believe, agent she queried before she got accepted. And his name is Christopher Little, and he was considered an obscure London literary agent. According to reports, I've seen the number at 8, but this thing I'm reading now says 12. So as many as 8 or 12 publishers rejected it before she finally sold it to Bloomsbury, which was a relatively young publishing company at the time, and gave her an advance of £2,500. So not a lot of an advance for the first Harry Potter novel. And that is, as I can attest, very common. That's what I've heard from everybody, is that first novel, you're a huge risk, and so they're just not going to give you a lot of money for it.
But I'm sure that she made her money on the second book, right?
Well, and she made money off the first book, no doubt, because that was just the advance. It's advance against royalties. Okay. So it's you earn that through royalties. So basically, until you hit £2,500 in her circumstance, she doesn't get any money beyond that advance. But once you hit that, you start earning royalties.
Gotcha.
But the novel went on to be wildly popular. Sold 300,000 copies in the UK in its first 2 years of publication. Won multiple awards. Was mostly a critical success. There was a few critics who famously didn't like certain things about it, didn't like the ending, which, you know, this is all. So one of the reasons I point this all out too is there is potentially 11 publishers who rejected this, and a couple literary agents, and that's one of the things that seems crazy about that job is, and I've talked to some professionals who do this sort of thing, and they all have stories, maybe not to this magnitude, but they all say they have stories about this sort of thing, about rejecting something that went on to become a bestseller, right, and could have changed their lives. And I mean, can you imagine being one of those people and knowing that you rejected, you know, the highest selling franchise of all time? It's insane.
I just feel like you'd get a new profession.
I don't know, man. It's crazy.
It's one of those things where it's like, how could you, as much as I love the story, if you're in that position and people are coming to you with a book every week and you're reading all the time, how could you possibly hit on everything?
Every week?
How could you possibly hit on every single thing that's great? You know what I mean? It's like, it's such a weird like crapshoot.
Well, when you're predicting the future and you're trying to say what's going to hit and what's not going to hit. And to outsiders, I think, yeah, it looks obvious. Like, of course, how can you not read the plot description of Harry Potter and know that it's going to be a, you know, billion-dollar success? But at its core, it's kind of trope-filled, you know, coming of age, hero's journey stuff that doesn't really jump off the page. When I read it, there is a copy of her like initial synopsis that she sent out to publishers online. You can find. She used to write all of this stuff at longhand, by the way, because she didn't have a computer, I think, early on, or maybe it was just her preference. I'm not really sure, but yeah, it was. There is a lot of these like even the chair in which she would write on at this like cafe. Sold at auction like later for some huge amount of money. It's sure, crazy. Yeah. It's like all been mythologized now, right?
Yeah.
So it did sell to the United States a couple years after its publication for a little over 100,000 American dollars, which was an unprecedented amount of money at the time for an unknown young adult writer, which made a big deal, made a big change in her life at that time. That was the biggest amount of money she got from it. She also then sold, well, it's around the same time, she sold the rights to the movie, the first 2 movies, to be developed, and sold the second book. And each one was like an increasing amount of money. It was reported that she got a 7-figure deal to adapt the books into the movies. So now all of a sudden she's a millionaire. And this is only a couple years after the novel came out. So it did happen quickly. And she has said that time in her life was also really, really wild and kind of stressful. And she had to, she also went and spoke with a therapist at the time to help her deal with that. And she's a big advocate for seeking therapy when you need it. And yeah, I mean, and now we all know and love the Harry Potter universe. As of February 2018, the Harry Potter books have sold more than 500 million copies worldwide, making them the best-selling book series in history and have been translated into 80 languages. The last 4 books consecutively set records as the fastest-selling books in history, with the final installment selling roughly 11 million copies in the United States within 24 hours of its release.
Oh, that's something else I guess we should talk about. I was at like a bunch of the book releases at like Barnes and Nobles. Yeah, I think I went to the book release for 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I was all dressed up, ready to get my book fresh out of the box at midnight.
What was your cosplay that you would go as? Would you go as Harry?
Always Harry Potter. Always Harry Potter. Because I mean, I have dark hair and I just identified so much, and it's
awesome. So, yeah, that's the history of the publication, which I think is really interesting, and it's I think she was really smart to structure her deals the way she did to retain rights, and you know, predict success. That's something we talked about at Viable Paradise. For writers, is that we were told basically at every point along the way, you should always be asking yourself, what if the thing I wrote is wildly popular? Because a lot of writers have a lot of self-doubt and will say things like, no one's ever going to adapt this into a movie. You know, like this, I'm lucky, I've got this publishing contract, but no one's ever going to like do that. You know what I mean? No one's ever going to make a theme park out of this. Mm-hmm. But if you have the foresight, you know what I mean? You can set yourself up to not get screwed out of your IP. So in that sense, I think her agent must have done a good job. You know, whether it was her agent or her or a combination of the two, they positioned her in a way in which she didn't lose her IP, which we're seeing does happen. A brief aside, it seems like the guy who wrote The Witcher basically gave away his video game rights for peanuts and has seen next to nothing as far as direct compensation for the Witcher franchise.
Well, it's being adapted into a show now for Netflix, so hopefully he sees some money for that.
I don't think so.
Really? You said video games though.
Apparently, no. But I think the TV series as well. I think all of the sort of media rights he basically gave away for nothing. Oh, now he's gotten an immense amount of publicity for it, and he's probably sold plenty of books. But yeah, I mean, it just goes to show what can happen. You know, people think, of course, the author must be making millions off of this, but unless it's just from pure publicity, sometimes that's not the case. Anyway, that's a brief aside. It's probably only interesting to other writers out there. But yeah, so we've arrived at the book itself. Do you remember anything about reading this book for the first time?
Man, this is so embedded in my brain.
How old would you have been, first off? So it came out in the U.S. in 1999.
I think I was. I would have been 6 or 7, and I read it like fairly soon after. Like I said, so I read it when the second one was out.
Oh, we should also, I don't know if we've noted this or not yet, but it was called The Philosopher's Stone, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in England, and they changed it to the Sorcerer's Stone for American audiences because they were worried that American audiences wouldn't associate Philosopher's Stone with magic.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I was really young, and to read it for the first time, all that I remember is just loving it. I just devoured it, and I wanted my letter to come in the next few years. I was ready for my Hogwarts invitation to show up, and that touches on, I think, something we can get to now. That I think the premise, the conceit of a wizarding school, wasn't necessarily the first time this had been done, but it was done so effectively.
and it was done in a way that was so approachable. And even as an adult reading these books, it makes me want to go back to school. Like I just like, and it's like I long for like an idealized school that never really existed. The closest I came to that was when I went to Seton Hill for my master's.
Yeah, that's the thing about the Hogwarts is that it reminds me of college because American schools aren't like, prep school kind of thing where you go away to school usually. I mean, there are plenty, but I didn't have that experience. So yeah, it makes me think of college a little bit. And like you said, like there's this like you said, it's like idealized, like, oh my God, like I want to do homework and learn these things that I don't know and like further myself. And then like when you get down to it and you're like, oh, I have a bunch of homework to do, it's like stressful and you gotta get it done.
Well, and they're learning magic,
Right.
And it's funny because like clearly they think some of it's boring and stuff, but none of it is. It's all interesting, right? Like from potions to spells to history of wizards, and like it's all interesting. And so,
but it's like,
yeah, it's a cool.
You could draw comparisons to chemistry and like all these other things that we should find fascinating and be so enthralled by.
And I think that's one of the like lessons you can take away from it is there is kind of a like a joy about learning and becoming, growing into a wizard through your knowledge. Which I love that part of the story, and I think a lot of people do. Yeah. All right, are we ready to get into some plot here? Is that time?
I am. I have one more thing to tell you that I thought was funny. I was talking to Caitlin about, so you talked about how Ben was super into it. Caitlin was huge into it too. Caitlin being your sister, so also Ben's sister. So she talked about the first time that she read it, she was so young that she was reading, because they kept talking about cloaks. Cloaks were a thing that, it's very like magical. And she recounts reading every time it said cloak as clock. So she thought that all the wizards were running around with clocks. and I was just like imagining this Flavor Flav world with the clock. Everybody's got clocks around their necks. So I thought that was funny. And that's specifically for this first one here. And I just thought that was hilarious.
Well, there's a big deal about clocks made early.
Yeah.
Everyone's wearing clocks. Yeah. Now I feel like I'm going to say that as clocks forever. I love it. Harry Potter has been living an ordinary life, constantly abused by his aunt and uncle Vernon and Petunia Dursley, and bullied by their son, Dudley, since the death of his parents 10 years prior. His life changes on his 11th birthday when he receives a letter of acceptance into Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, delivered by a half-giant named Hagrid. Hagrid explains Harry's hidden past as the wizard son of James and Lily Potter, and how they were murdered by the most evil and dark wizard of all time, Lord Voldemort, or Voldemort, depending on if you... Isn't that how they pronounce it in the movie, Voldemort?
It's Voldemort, yeah.
Yeah, but in the book it's Voldemort. At least the audiobook, that's how he pronounced it. And I believe J.K. Rowling has come out and said that that's how she intended it to be pronounced as well.
Oh, Voldemort. I didn't know that. I've always said Voldemort.
No, that's definitely true.
Wow.
So, yeah. Anyway, I'll probably switch between the two intermittently.
I'm just going to let everybody know I'm going to say Voldemort.
The strangest bit of the murder was how Voldemort was unable to kill him, but instead had his own powers removed and blasted away, sparking Harry's immense fame among the magical community. Hagrid introduces Harry to the wizarding world, bringing him to places such as Diagon Alley and a hidden London street where Harry gets his owl Hedwig and various school supplies, and Gringotts Wizarding Bank, where he uncovers a fortune left to him by his parents in his vault.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about how I want to save most of these one-to-one comparisons for the book to the movie for the movie episode. So like saying like this is different than happened in the movie. I want to save that for the movie mostly, but I do want to talk about specifically how this book opens with Mr. Dursley and how it's like him slowly seeing these magical beings showing up. And then before we get Dumbledore and McGonagall at the front doorstep dropping Harry off. So like having that and having like wizards celebrating in the streets, and it's like the night that Voldemort's been defeated. It's just like I've always felt like this was the stronger like start to the story. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that kind of.
Stronger than
the movie. I wanted to
stronger than the movie.
Just because the movie jumps straight. It's like a little more mysterious when they're on the Dumbledore shows up and he's putting out the lights. But I think it's interesting to see like the Muggle world reacting to the Wizarding world before we see the Wizarding world right away.
Well, there's a lot of storytelling theory I could talk about here, but one of them I would say that I think what's happening here is what you're reacting to is the beginning of the series arc. They set up there's sort of this ring theory that can describe the circular nature of the stories of these novels. And one of the largest ring is the ring of the series that it comprises, book 1 to book 7. And that first chapter, that opening chapter, is very tied to that. It's the outside world, it's the headmasters, it's all of this background. The movie decided to focus on, I think, the story of just that movie to begin. And so Harry Potter's story begins with him in the cupboard. And so they kind of passed that up for whatever reason.
I understand why they did it, to streamline it.
Yeah, well, and they didn't know how well these movies were going to do. It was still a risk. And they didn't know for sure there was going to be 7 movies, right?
8, yeah.
Now, there is a lot you can say about Rowling's forethought and being willing to construct it, because she wrote a lot of these books at the same time and mapped out 7 books from the beginning.
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard that she knew where it would end very early on.
Yeah, so she was able to do that. Now, how much she was into these sort of structuring theories, I don't know. I don't know if she's ever revealed that, but a lot of people have been able to pick that out.
Yeah, you were talking about the hero's journey, and I think Joseph Campbell is like the hero's journey guy. Like he was the one who. Okay, so do you think that this story on this first book on its own is like a clear example of the hero's journey?
Yes.
Through and through. Okay, and then you would say all of them are, or just for now you're saying? Because I was wondering, because it feels to me, and I'll get to this in a second. The first few books I think have a certain tone to them because of. It's like Harry figuring out the world that he's in, and he's like this fish out of water. And so it's like he finds out about this weird guy, Voldemort. And then it comes back around to the fact that he has to fight Voldemort at the end. And then in the second one, it's like the Chamber of Secrets. Something's going on with the Chamber of Secrets and what's going on. Like it's, you know what I mean? They're almost like mysteries. The first couple are like mysteries. And then as it starts to go through, it feels like a little, I don't know. It's like, I feel like you could probably still put that filter on it.
So at its core, honestly, it's a very broad thing, and a lot of stories fit this mold for a reason. And so it's also known as the monomyth. Essentially, it's this. A hero goes on an adventure, and in a decisive crisis, wins a victory, and then comes home changed or transformed. Right. That's it at its basis, its core. It's that return home that I think really lands this solidly in Hero's Journey. It's a transformation, there's a crisis, there's a victory, and then a return home changed. And then you can say that because basically every novel, and correct me if I'm wrong, follows a year at Hogwarts, right?
To a point. I don't know. That's another thing that I don't want to spoil anything if anybody hasn't read all of them. So yeah, basically. I would say basically, but there's...
Okay, so and because of that, I think it lends itself to this. I go to school, I do a bunch of crazy shit, I face certain challenges, I come home changed.
Right.
And I being Harry Potter.
So even though it's the same, even though each time he's going to the same place and doing these events, it's still the same. You know what I mean? Is he really going back as changed at the end of 2 as he was at the end of 1? I
think so, because he faces different challenges and he changes in different ways and grows in different ways. So we're following the hero's journey in a sense that we're seeing Harry evolve and grow to the wizard he was perhaps meant to be, or perhaps was latent within him or not. And yeah, so I think. I don't know. I honestly, it's kind of academic whether or not it truly is, and is every book its own hero's journey. But I think it is a little bit at least, and it's kind of interesting to think about that cyclical nature of these books, because like I said, there's an overall cycle for the entire series, and then there is that individual book cycle too. Mm-hmm. And the ring theory. I can get into this more as we cover the series, but it's interesting.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about specifically the hero's journey and how it's used as a template. And although it may be like this cliche thing that people do a lot now, everyone responds so well to it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, well, it's the monomyth. It's like one of the oldest stories.
Right.
It's the Odyssey,
Right. Or like, what's it called? Gilgamesh. And what's that story called? Beowulf.
Beowulf, yeah.
So my question is basically that, is it that this is a popular way of writing a story, or is it that it's an effective way of writing a story? Or do you think both?
It's both.
Yeah.
I think it's effective, and because it's effective, it's popular. Would be the way I would put it, I think.
All right, well that's good enough for me. I'm sold.
And I think there is some nowadays there's a little bit of it's like cynicism around it of like, oh, another hero's journey.
Right.
But it will always be a classic story structure. And
there's people that swear by it. Some of the most successful people swear by it and still make the most unique.
That every book is the hero's journey. Yeah.
Yeah, and they may still make the most unique stories with it. So.
Yeah, and then people take it and they say, oh, I'm gonna do a play off of that, and I'm gonna change certain elements of it, and I'm gonna try and but they're still using it as something to work off of. So
right.
It's an essential human story, I think, and one that is effective for that reason.
Okay, so I have another structural question for you then about kind of this story, because I feel like a lot of people are very, very aware of the plot details, and we can talk about some of those as well. But I wanted to know if you feel like this is also a portal fantasy, because we've talked about that before on the podcast, because it's like he goes through platform 9 3/4 and then seemingly goes into another world.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of the same world, and the magic doesn't only take place there.
There's another kind of fantasy called liminal fantasy that is about the magic kind of being like seeping into our world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would say this is a bit of both of those, because the portal, he goes through a portal, but he also is still in our world, even though it seems like he's in another one. And then when he returns, like it doesn't stay behind the portal. Like
right.
it's kind of around him all the time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a bit of both.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to talk a little bit about how this novel opens up with Harry being in an abusive situation, being locked in a cupboard for weeks at a time, being beaten by his parents, being bullied by his, brother, I guess, or cousin or whatever he is, Dudley. And it's really dark, and we've talked about some of the reasons why Rowling wrote it that way, but I think it's interesting because some of these subjects would be considered pretty taboo. And it wouldn't surprise me if some of the publishers who turned away from it might have for these reasons.
And what's funny is that I feel like she walks a line here where it's like they're clearly abusing him mentally, and they are potentially like there's some hitting going on from Dudley for sure, and like maybe some smacks around and things like that. But she doesn't ever go into full on like getting drunk and like beating him or anything like that.
No, but I think he does like throw him at one point, and like there's definitely some physicality
for sure, and it's awful. But I feel like that's where she was able to keep it PG to where like kids can read it and realize that these are bad people. Yeah, and it still be dark enough to where you're like, this is an awful situation for a child to be in.
Right, and it's the classic. He's an orphan with a mysterious backstory and latent magical ability, and so these are all big tropes, and were tropes at the time in which she wrote this novel. Now have become even stronger tropes and even more omnipresent. But it is, I think, we've talked about there's something effective about the way she does this. And Harry Potter, what do you think of Harry Potter the character? Because to me, he's a bit of that. He's designed to be almost a Mary Sue type, you could argue, right. In that he is there for you to insert yourself into a story, feel like you're a famous latent wizard who just isn't aware of his own magical abilities, and the thrill of sort of discovering that. But how, is that character a good character? Clearly money would say yes, and popularity would say yes, but I don't know. It's an interesting question.
So I would say that I agree with you for the first one, maybe the first two, and we start to see his personality develop a little more, and like him be more of an individual, and like making decisions that the reader, putting themselves in those shoes might not make that decision. Right. But I definitely agree in this one. It's definitely like, well, what would I do now? I'm going to get my wand and I'm going to get my owl and I'm going to ride my broomstick and be the best. And like,
Yeah.
He's
the best seeker ever.
Seeker in a
and, like,
century,
all this
in a
stuff,
century. But so the thing is, like, I responded well to that as a child too, though.
Sure.
So it's like that might be a selling point.
And it's interesting because the Mary Sue thing has become such a like hot button criticism, or at least it was around the time of Star Wars coming out, because it reared its head again there. But a lot of the like most iconic characters are Mary Sue's or Marty Stu's. Marty Stu, I think, is the other gendered version of it. But it's the same idea, and you can look at Luke Skywalker as one.
Sure. Well, it's like, does the hero's journey lend itself to having Mary Sue's?
I don't think it has to, but it often does.
It's like these unknowing heroes, or these heroes that didn't necessarily want to be heroes, but wanted to go on an adventure and became unlikely heroes.
Yeah. Well, and you can look at like Katniss Everdeen. You can look at a lot of these like YA heroes as being that way.
Yeah.
And it's. I just want to say it's become kind of popular to shit on that trope.
Even though it's fun and effective sometimes.
Even though it's fun and effective. I mean, a clear one we covered, Wade Watts from Ready Player One is definitely that. So it's all throughout popular media, and I don't know. Like I guess I'm kind of torn on it because I can understand some of the criticism of it, but I also feel like a lot of it is kind of sour grapes. Like it's kind of silly almost to try and say it's a way to look at something people enjoy and say like you shouldn't enjoy it and here's why. And I've never really liked that part of it.
So because I want to talk about some of the lore here. I don't want to spoil anything from later books if possible, but I do want to talk about the fact that abused wizards who didn't necessarily know that they had abilities when they were younger, like people who were being suppressed in some way, sometimes became violent and dangerous. And it's a miracle that Harry doesn't turn into one. And I think later, so with the Fantastic Beasts film, she gave a name to it, but there were examples of it before, like Dumbledore's sister. They're like dangerous because they have these abilities, but they're not developed. And some things happen to basically stunt that or just try to suppress it. And it's called Obscurus now in the Fantastic Beasts films. And it's this idea that like that ability and that stuff inside of you will like latch onto your emotions or things that are going on, and specifically like abuse. It'll like lash out from people who are being abused. So it's like it's a miracle that Harry didn't just explode and like hurt his Dursley's family in some way. I don't know. And I just think that it's very interesting because it's like, maybe it's like the goodness within him, or maybe it's the mother's love, like we learn about at the end of this one. Maybe like there's something there. There's so much that goes into this too, like prophecy and all this other stuff that starts to pop up in other books.
It's the chosen one trope too, which is definitely strong here.
I do like the way that she played with it though. When we get to that book, I like the way that she played with like the idea of like what you would think from a chosen one prophecy.
Right. Harry leaves the Dursleys' home to catch the Hogwarts Express from King's Cross Railway Station's secret Hogwarts platform 9 3/4. On the train, he quickly befriends fellow first-year Ronald Weasley and Hermione Granger, whose snobbiness and affinity for spells initially causes the two boys to dislike her. There, Harry also makes an enemy of another first-year, Draco Malfoy, who shows prejudice against Ron for his family's financial difficulties. Arriving at Hogwarts, the first years are assigned by the magical sorting hat to houses that best suit their personalities, the four houses being Gryffindor, Slytherin, Hufflepuff, and Ravenclaw. Harry hears from Ron about Slytherin's dark reputation, which is known to house the potential dark witches and wizards, and thus objects to being sorted into Slytherin, despite the hat claiming that Harry has potential to develop under that house. He winds up in Gryffindor with Ron and Hermione, while Draco is sorted into Slytherin like his whole family before him. So let's stop there, and we can talk Sorting Hat. We can talk arriving at Hogwarts.
Yeah. So first, let me just ask you how you feel about Ron and Hermione as characters, especially early on, like the way that their dynamic is.
I mean, it's good. I mean, I've always liked Hermione. Honestly, like of all the characters, she's the one I identified with the most.
Yeah, I love Hermione.
I think as kind of like an achieving student, I think I was often that, if not always that, in my life. I often was kind of trying to be one of the top of the class, and So I always like that. And then it always feels like she has to work at things harder than Harry, who just kind of comes by it naturally. And I've always I feel that way about my own writing. Like, I feel like I'm someone who has to work very hard at trying to write well, whereas other people can seem to have some sort of natural latent magic that they tap into. Now, whether or not that's true is very debatable. But yeah, I think I always identified with Hermione and liked her for that reason.
Yeah, I really like the way that like each character has like a distinct, like you said, like Harry's kind of latently he has all of these things, and Ron is supposed to be this person who has nothing, and yet like has but then has the wizarding background, and so like because of that he has his own things that he's bringing to it, and Hermione being Muggle-born is like basically like trying to prove herself. And she's working that much harder, like you were talking about. But I just love that her in general, like that know-it-all attitude. I feel like I have that sometimes, to an annoying extent sometimes for people around me too. So it's like, I hated the way that they treated her at certain points, but I also identified with it a little bit. But if we're being honest, like as a kid and growing up, I identified mostly with Harry. And it's also because I had like this like nonchalant attitude and stuff. And like I feel like I've grown out of that a decent amount, but it's just like I felt I was very privileged, not like in that sense of the word. I wasn't.
You didn't
like,
live in a cupboard?
I didn't live in a cupboard. I was very privileged in comparison to Harry Potter, but
Right.
in terms of just like things coming naturally and like not having to work very hard, I felt like I had a lot of that. Which brings us to the houses. If you
Real quick, I do also want to say I'm recording from my own Harry Potter cupboard right now. still there, filled up with blankets and all kinds of stuff, but literally the room under the stairs in my house.
And I can attest to the fact that it looks like the exact size that the cupboard that we see in the film is. So it looks about the same size.
Very appropriate.
All right, so houses. I want to
Sorting.
talk about these houses. You want to go first?
So first, let's talk a little bit about the sorting hat and the process. It's interesting. I can't not think of the Sarah Gailey sorting hat thing I sent you,
Right.
or had you read. They talk about the sorting hat and what's the character's name from Lord of the Rings?
Tom Bombadil.
Tom Bombadil, and how they both are like these ancient characters who sing and know things about you and are creepy. And when I was reading,
And they know things about the world, but they won't get in like involved with the goings on of the world.
And so when I was reading the song from the hat, like I kept thinking of that, and I'll put that in the show notes so people can check it out. It's really a fun read. But yeah, so this creepy hat sits on your head and it knows all your thoughts, and then it assigns you into a house. And I thought it was interesting how with Harry, it kind of wanted to put him in Slytherin and kind of was like pushing him that direction, but Harry's wanting to be in Gryffindor seems to have been the thing that sort of made it so where the sorting hat said, okay, I'll put you in Gryffindor. And it's interesting because, which we're about to talk about, Pottermore and all this stuff, like they don't really ask you what house you want to be in. They just put you in it.
Well, to an extent, I feel like. So a couple things to talk about with the sorting hat. It like later, it's a light spoiler, but we kind of find out that it's kind of where you want to go. It's if you want to be in a certain house, you're probably going to end up in that house. And I think the houses are designed to be that way. It's like the thing that you would identify with, you'll probably be sorted into. And I think that's the same thing with Pottermore is if you know what the attributes of each house is, I think that you can test whichever way you want to. But if you answer honestly with the questions and like you actually feel the way that you're answering, you'll be sorted into the house that you probably should be in. With that being said, I don't think that Pottermore is the end all be all perfect way of knowing which house you're going to be in.
Okay, so we're into it now. We're into it now, buddy. Let's talk about it.
Before that, let's talk about houses because I think two houses in particular get a super bad rap in this first book.
Oh yeah, I agree.
So, and this is something that's like pretty controversial too. So Slytherin being one of them, they're basically like from the first book and from the first movie, they're just the evil house.
They're the evil house.
Fair.
They're the villains. They're everybody in there is kind of an asshole in the first book, at least.
Which is
Like,
not fair because that's not what the house is supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be about being evil. It's about being cunning and being driven and kind of doing whatever it takes to
ambitious
succeed in your ambitions.
Doing what it takes, which can sometimes mean cutting corners and stuff, but kind of to achieve a goal, like put a Slytherin on it, and it's like they're going to get it done.
Right.
You
And
know,
then
one
the
way
other
or
to
another.
the other to get a bad rap, I think for a lot of the books actually, is Hufflepuff.
Yeah.
Because everybody just thinks of Hufflepuff as like this forgotten house. Well, and I'm speaking in terms of like within the story, because I do identify with some qualities of Hufflepuff. But I think that it's a bummer that people just see Hufflepuff and they're like, oh, Hufflepuff, and they like write them off as like these people who don't have ambition, or they don't have courage, or they don't have, you know, like the
Yeah, and
intellect.
it's almost they're almost like comedic, like considered kind of like goofy in
But the
I don't know,
problem
or,
with
like,
that is that like they're
stoners
like
almost.
yeah, but at the end of the day, they're like the most compassionate and like the people that you would want to be friends with, and
Right.
like I don't know. I think that I just want to address the fact that like.
And I do want to say that I think they're the most popular house these days, at least from what I've seen. Like, people love Hufflepuff these days.
Well, yeah, Hufflepuffs are just cool. Like, it's just like that's just how it is. I have some funny stories about houses and stuff, but let's.
Now, I would argue that Ravenclaw is also not really done a lot of favors in this. I mean, I guess there's a certain amount of respect granted to them.
Exactly.
but-
they're like, oh, those are like intelligent, like.
Because our main characters are all Gryffindor and they're opposed to Slytherin, we get very little of Ravenclaw and very little of Hufflepuff, just in
Yeah.
general. Like, I almost wish one of them had been sorted into one of the other houses. I guess it wouldn't have made sense for the conceit of like wanting to succeed for your house and be on the same team.
I think you'll be happy because as we go, we get more from other houses, which
I
where we
would
don't
figure.
really get quite as much in the movies from other houses. Even like we get a lot more as the books go on. So that's something to keep an eye on. But let's talk about our houses.
Let's do it. Who wants to go first?
You go first.
There are a lot of tests you can take to get sorted, right? There's some tests that'll even like give you like a blend of like what your dominant house is and what your like minor house is and all this stuff. And for me, I've always tested Ravenclaw. The one that I took that was like gave you your major house and then your minor house, it tested me as Ravenclaw with a minor in Gryffindor. Now, Pottermore is the only test I've taken that put me into Gryffindor. So I feel I've always identified more as a Ravenclaw, but I recognize that like Gryffindor is probably my second house if I were to be in a different one. So I don't know. I guess it's funny because like whenever I log into Pottermore, like it says it's got all these like red and it's Gryffindor and all this stuff, but I never feel like that's appropriate for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. So I always identified Gryffindor. Always, like every test that I've ever taken said Gryffindor. I've took Pottermore. I like made multiple accounts because I wanted to try to get a different Patronus. And every time I took the test, I came out Gryffindor. It's always just been the one to me that like was like I identified with in every way. But it's funny because like as I've grown, like I said, I've really really closely identified with Harry when I was growing up, and since then I've like kind of started to see how I'm different than that in a lot of ways. And I think that if I was to have a number 2 house, I would want my number 2 house to be Ravenclaw, and I think that I have a lot of attributes of Ravenclaw, but my actual number 2 house is Hufflepuff.
See, I in Hufflepuff is what I would think for you. It's interesting. Have you taken that actual test that does the like major minor thing?
I think so. And I think I got Gryffindor,
Hufflepuff, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a cool test. I don't. There's probably a million that have come out since then. And the thing I liked about those tests was that there was a lot more questions. Because my memory of taking the Pottermore test was that it was incredibly short for what I thought I was going to get. It was like 5 or 6 questions and it was over. And I was like, oh. And I felt like I didn't really get a chance to like really round out any sort of like personality from those questions.
Right.
So yeah, it's one of those things I wish there was an option to retake it. But anyway, so even though it says Gryffindor on my Pottermore, I believe I am Ravenclaw. So
Well,
Team
we
Ravenclaw.
would be happy to have you in Gryffindor if you wanted to be, but it sounds like you don't want to be.
I also feel like Gryffindor people love to like or feel compelled to like apologize for it. I think because it's like the main house in the books. So a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
will
people-
say that they get so much screen time and so much book time that people love to hate Gryffindor. I've been called a fuckboy because I told somebody I was a Gryffindor, and I was like, okay. I was like, thanks a lot. I was like, I don't know what that means, but thank you. But yeah, it's just one of those things where it's like, I don't know. I've always, even if it's like, I would say even if at every turn I don't make the Gryffindor decision, which I feel like I do a lot of times, I strive to make the Gryffindor decision. So
Okay.
I don't know. It's kind of interesting, but it
Fight
is
for
also
what's
funny
right.
because at the end of the day, I think I have like a personality that's more like just letting everything go with the flow.
So how much do you know about like the Patronuses and the wands and stuff? Because there is also all that, and like I really don't know what to make of most of it.
To tell you the truth,
But
I
you're
don't
all
think
into
that,
the lore, so
yeah, to tell you the truth, I don't think. Are you saying in terms of the story or on Pottermore?
I'm saying like, what do you know about it? As far as like, if someone tells you, oh yeah, my Patronus is this, are you gonna be like, oh well, that means
No.
that? Like, do you
As
like have
far
them all
as I know,
memorized?
as far as I know, the Patronus is somewhat like there may be certain attributes that like lean you towards certain things, but I think that it's like fairly like I think that they if you have like really rare answers or something, maybe you would be more inclined to be like a lion or something like that. But my Patronus is a chestnut mare, which is just I think is a
cool.
pretty cool Patronus, but not anything I would have ever expected. Like I'd be like, oh, I want like a wolf or like something cool, something really. But mine is a chestnut mare, which I actually enjoy.
Okay, and mine is a hummingbird. I
Dude,
don't know
that's
what
pretty
that
cool.
means.
That's
Is
pretty
it?
pretty legit. I think that's pretty cool. At least it's
Um,
a bird. Like that can fly around and stuff. And then as far as wands go, I just know like there are certain ones when when I was reading like certain cores will have different kind of strengths and weaknesses and stuff.
oh, that's right. Yeah.
And so and different woods like tell within the like the context of the books, it tells you something about the characters.
Yeah.
Like their wand
All right,
does.
so share your wand with our listeners, and then I'll share mine, and then we'll move on from this fairly self-indulgent point here. But it's fun. I mean, when else do you get a chance to talk about this on a podcast?
Yes. So my wand is a laurel wood with a phoenix feather core, 13-inch and solid flexibility, which I think is awesome because again, the phoenix feather is like very prominent within the story. It's like Harry and Voldemort have phoenix feather cores, and I think they're the rarest core. So that's something that I'm always like kind of proud of.
Awesome. So I am ash wood. So you were what, laurel wood, you said?
Laurel wood, yeah.
So what kind of wood is laurel wood? I don't know much about it.
It is said that a laurel wand cannot perform a dishonorable act, although in the quest for glory, a not uncommon goal for those best suited to these wands, I have known laurel wands perform powerful and sometimes lethal magic. Laurel wands are sometimes called fickle, but this is unfair. The laurel wand seems unable to tolerize laziness in a possessor, and it is in such conditions that it is most easily and willingly won away. Otherwise, it will cleave happily to its first match forever, and indeed has the unusual and engaging attribute of issuing a spontaneous lightning strike if another witch or wizard attempts to steal it.
So mine says, those witches and wizards best suited to ash wands are not, in my experience, lightly swayed from their beliefs or purposes. However, the brash or overconfident witch or wizard who often insists on trying wands of this prestigious wood will be disappointed by its effects. The ideal owner may be stubborn and will certainly be courageous, but never crass or arrogant.
I feel like the wands, as far as the wands go, it's going to tell you something that you're like, I like that, and I feel like I can put that, like I can match that up to myself.
Yeah, it's like astrology or something. I also have the Phoenix Feather Core.
Nice. We're gonna our cores are gonna, whenever we attack each other in a duel, we're gonna connect.
Is that how it works?
Not always.
And I am hard flexibility, 13 3/4 in length.
Nice.
So there we go. That's our wands, which feels a little bit phallic for my liking, but
That's our especially like the length thing and like
the
telling
length
you about
and
the
the hardness.
flexibility. Yeah, I'll just we'll move on from that.
We've compared wands now. But seriously, listeners, if you want to write in and let us know your house, your Patronus, your wand
Also,
types.
please also tell me why I'm a fuckboy for being a Gryffindor.
Yeah, explain that. What do you think? Is it bullshit that I'm not embracing my Gryffindor Pottermore thing, or is it more like in line with the sorting hat? Letting me choose what I feel fits me more. And other tests have told me that I am Ravenclaw. But let's move on. I'm going to finish out a little bit of plot here. As classes begin at Hogwarts, Harry discovers his innate talent for flying on broomsticks and is recruited into his house Quidditch team as Seeker. He also comes to dislike the school's potions master, Severus Snape, who is also the head of the Slytherin house, and who acts with bias in favor of the members of his house. Malfoy tricks Harry and Ron into a duel in the trophy room to get them out of their rooms at night and secretly tells Filch, the school's caretaker, where they will be. Hermione unintentionally is forced to come along after her attempts to stop them fail. Harry, Ron, and Hermione find Neville asleep outside the common area because he has forgotten the password to get in. After realizing the duel was a setup to get them in trouble, they run away. They then discover a huge three-headed dog standing guard over a trapdoor in a forbidden corridor. The school year is interrupted by the entrance of a troll into the school, which enters the girls' bathrooms where Hermione was. However, she is saved by Harry and Ron, and as a result, Hermione is grateful and the three become best friends. Coupled with Snape's recent leg injury as well as his behavior, the recent events prompt Harry, Hermione, and Ron to suspect him to be looking for a way to enter the trapdoor. All right, so that's a lot of the intrigue of what's going on at the school itself, and we see our characters bonding here.
So, I mean, like we talked about before, the idea of being at the school was something that always really, really pulled me toward it. Like, really pulled me towards this book and made me really want to be in this world. But then we get into the adventures, and that's really that's like where the Gryffindor in me is always like, I got to go on adventures, I got to do stuff, and
Right.
that the adventures that they would go on and the ways, like I was talking about before, they kind of are like these mysteries where it's like somebody's doing something and we have to figure out why. So it's like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. There's a Sorcerer's Stone, somebody wants it, and they're doing things within the school. Who's doing it? Chamber of Secrets, same way. Somebody's opened the Chamber of Secrets. What's going on with that? Who's doing that and why?
Right.
So it feels like this like natural progression for us to like introduce the conflict, and then we go into how their kids, how these kids are going to solve this problem that adults should be handling. And I always felt like that was such a, because like when kids are in over their head and you're a kid reading, you feel like you are, and it's just that the idea that like coming out the other side is like, I don't know, it for me really made me feel like I could do things that were beyond me as far as age was concerned.
So for this part, there's a couple things I want to talk about. One is the setup of having students share houses with teachers who are all trying to like compete for this winning of the cup thing throughout the year. I wonder, I mean, I bet there are things, I mean, it's a wide world. I bet there are places where this sort of thing happens in the school, but I wonder what you think of like how well would this actually work in real life if they were to do something like this?
I think that within the wizarding community in this world, I think that like the teachers hold themselves to a really high standard, so like it wouldn't get murky. Like if somebody did something bad, they would get points taken away. Did something good, they would get points. But it seems like Snape is like the alternative to that. He's like playing favorites clearly. But I also think that like as time goes on, the teachers are it's seemingly less invested in the fact that their house is going to win the cup. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that Slytherin had won like 6 times in a row during this book. So like everybody wanted Slytherin to not win. So everybody's invested in like making sure somebody else wins. But yeah, I'm not really sure. It's like this merit system.
Yeah, and it also creates a really intense competitive thing in the school, right? Where everybody's very tribal, and everybody's like, this is our house and this is your house, and then we're all going to compete with each other. And they do say that there are classes where like 2 different groups will be mixed together, but for the most part, you go to class with your house. And then it also starts to feel like the instructors who are part of my house are on my team, and those who are not are like adversarial. Yeah. Especially with Slytherin. So it's interesting. Like I don't know.
You think it's like a commentary by J.K. about like the tribe mentality?
Maybe, but because everybody loves going to school at Hogwarts, and everybody's so bought into it, and it seems to be such a pervasive thing through, because it's not just Hogwarts, right? Like it's kind of like the larger society of the wizarding world, right? Like everybody seems to sort of identify with these houses. Whether it's from their time in school or whatever, what have you. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It creates a lot of drama. So I think narratively, it's a brilliant move. I think we all love to have our allegiances. But in the real world, would it be a great thing to do in a school? I don't know. I'm not sure.
The thing that really brings me back around is like the Quidditch. It's like almost like if you think of like a bunch of high schools in the same building, all competing for their own football team or something. That's what Quidditch
Right.
ultimately comes to, which is also something I wanted to say, is that I feel like that was like an accessible way for JK to hit on a different, because I'm sure there are people who like Harry Potter a lot that could care less about the Quidditch stuff. And there's people who really responded to the Quidditch stuff that were like really into sports, and that like pulled them in, and they were like, wow, this is like kind of similar to something that I like.
You're right. Yeah, it does appeal to a different sort of person, right? Who is into more of the like physical fun stuff like that versus like learning and magic, and I don't know. Yeah, there is something kind of there for everybody. I agree with that.
Do you feel like Snape is justified? I mean, I know that you probably know most of the details and stuff, but just like in terms of this first book, do you think that Snape is justified? Do you believe the things that Dumbledore says at the end?
So I've forgotten a lot of what happens in the later novels and movies, or well, I haven't read the novels, later movies. So I will say that. So what I'm going off of is what I read here, and that is that Snape feels like he owes Harry's parents, and because of that was like seeking to protect him, and acting sort of in like fishy ways that made them suspect him. Hermione, Harry, and Ron. So I don't know what you mean, I guess, by is he justified?
So in the first book, it seems to me that like maybe it wasn't fully developed at this point, but like Snape protecting Harry but absolutely hating him through the whole book is like this like really like it doesn't like match up for me. Like it doesn't it's like if he wanted to protect this kid, wouldn't he be a little bit nicer? Like I understand that he hates his father but feels like indebted to him, but at the same time it always felt weird to me that he hated him so much. Like he was so after Harry. And I guess it leads into the mystery, right? It's like that's like the red herring. It's like you want to think that it's Snape.
Well, and I do like, I mean, I guess it's somewhat of a spoiler, but my opinion of Snape changes over the course of the movies for the more positive.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to say that was a struggle I had rereading this novel, and reading the novel for the first time, because as much as I knew about Snape, the mystery and the like kind of like bait and switch part of it felt almost like a chore for me. Like I was like, all right, I got to read about why they suspect Snape again, when I know it wasn't like he's not actually the one behind this stuff, right? And so that was a struggle I had a little bit with it, with engaging fully with the text.
That's another thing that I think she does. I think the sequels really prop up a lot of this material. I think that I love this first book. I think it's a great YA novel, and I've reread it millions of times, but I think that the sequels really elevate this stuff because of what she was able to build into this, because the Snape stuff gets really murky for a little while. You're like, is he, isn't he, what's going on? Like, because we get a lot of his backstory and some of that like his allegiances.
Yeah, we're talking about it in ways because we're trying not to spoil things, so I think let's move on. Hermione makes Harry direct his attention to his first ever Quidditch game, where his broomstick begins to lose control and threatens to throw him off. This leads Hermione to suspect Snape is jinxing Harry's broom. After the excitement of winning the match has died down, Christmas approaches and Harry receives an invisibility cloak from an anonymous source claiming that the cloak belonged to Harry's father. Using the cloak to explore the school at night to investigate the possibility of what is under the trapdoor, he discovers the Mirror of Erised, in which the viewer sees his or her deepest desires come true. A visit to Hagrid's cottage at the foot of the school leads the trio to find a newspaper report stating that there has been an attempted robbery at Gringotts vault, the same vault that Hagrid and Harry had visited when Harry was getting his school supplies. A further indiscretion from Hagrid allows them to work out that the object kept under the trapdoor is a Philosopher's Stone, or Sorcerer's Stone in America, which grants its user immortality as well as the ability to turn any metal into pure gold. Harry is also informed by a centaur named Firenze in the forest that a plot to steal the stone is being orchestrated by none other than Voldemort himself, who schemes to use it to be restored back to his body and return to power. Harry, Hermione, and Ron fear that the theft is imminent and descend through the trapdoor themselves. Okay, so let's stop there. A good bit of plot is covered. We get this sort of mystery of Snape being the one who's behind it all. We're introduced to a centaur. There's like stuff going on outside the school, and Voldemort kind of makes his return here a little bit, at least.
So as far as this cloak that he gets, the invisibility cloak, I always thought that this was the coolest part. This was my favorite Harry Potter related thing, was the fact that he could travel, like go around Hogwarts in the dead of night and explore all of these historic places and these secret passages and all the places that could be ever thought of in Hogwarts. And the way that it's later used is just, I think that the invisibility cloak was the part that made Harry Potter seem completely like blown wide open. Like anything could happen now. He can be invisible. He can go anywhere. And then later knowing that like Dumbledore is watching him while he's using the mirror, while he's also invisible without one, and just knowing how powerful Dumbledore could be. I love that like there's something that Harry has that basically helps him, because he knows nothing of this world, and it's kind of his way of like using this cloak to be basically introduced to it, and he can continually learn and kind of catch up with it. And I don't know, it just leads to a lot of great stuff in the novels.
Yeah, and it gets him in a lot of trouble in a lot of ways too. So yeah, definitely cool. I did like what you said about Dumbledore, and we haven't talked about him much at all, but I do love that he's set up as this opposite to Voldemort, and how he is like the other wizard who is like so powerful that he's extremely respected, and everyone, you know, is like in awe of him, basically. And we get that in the opening chapter, right? And he's the one wizard who's willing to say Voldemort's name out loud and not say he who shall not be named, and he thinks it's silly, and all this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. They make us think. I mean, he's the Gandalf of this story, right?
And I wanted to say, I was getting ready to say that. So he's Gandalf. And again, I love the way that J.K. Rowling kind of subverts that at some point. And like he can do no wrong. He knows everything that's going to happen. He literally leaves the school, and when he's most needed, comes back just because he felt like he should come back. He knew that something was going on. And but at the end of the day, Dumbledore doesn't know everything, and he might not. And it's also interesting that Harry asks nearing the end, he asks kind of why Voldemort was after him, and Dumbledore says, "We'll tell you when you're older," kind of thing. I think that like setting up Dumbledore to be this peak of wizarding level human, and then also kind of like humanizing him as we go is a great thing. But in this book, he's infallible. It's amazing. Like, he's just like the coolest fantasy character.
He's Gandalf, which is going to be fun to read, because we've covered Fellowship of the Ring, and but we haven't covered Two Towers yet. We haven't covered Return of the King yet. So it'll be interesting to kind of do both of these and track these major wizards and any other wizards we might cover for other fantasy series, right? And they're very archetypal. Mm-hmm. And see how each author handles them. So they encounter a series of obstacles, each of which requires unique skills possessed by one of the three, one of which requires Ron to sacrifice himself in the life-size game of Wizard's Chess. In the final room, Harry, now alone, finds Quirinus Quirrell, the defense against the dark arts teacher, who had been the one working behind the scenes to kill Harry by first jinxing his broom and then letting a troll into the school. Snape had been trying to protect Harry instead. Now Quirrell is partly possessed by Voldemort, whose face has sprouted from the back of Quirrell's head, but is constantly concealed by his oversized turban. Voldemort needs Harry's help to get past the final obstacle, the Mirror of Erised, forcing him to stand before the mirror. It recognizes Harry's lack of greed, and the stone deposits into his pocket. As Quirrell attempts to seize the stone and kill Harry, his flesh burns on contact with the boy's skin and breaks into blisters. Harry's scar suddenly burns with pain, and he passes into unconsciousness. 3 days later, he awakens in the school's infirmary, where Dumbledore explains his survival against Voldemort and it is owed to his mother sacrificing her life in order for him to live, leaving a powerful protective charm on Harry that lives in his blood, burning Quirrell, who is possessed by hatred and greed. He also reveals himself as the one who sent Harry his father's invisibility cloak, while Quirrell has been left to die by Voldemort, and the stone is now destroyed. The school year ends at the final feast, during which Gryffindor wins the House Cup, and Harry returns to Privet Drive for the summer.
So, I mean, just Harry, the way that it's like this, there's not a battle at the end, right? Harry wins by outsmarting, but also maybe being like positioned by Dumbledore to know how to get the stone, and the fact that
and just this to get previous skin enchantment that we didn't know about,
right? I mean, it makes for like a lot of like, I think that the love, although maybe being a little on the nose is in this. It's always been like really emotional to me because I probably have a lot of nostalgia for it, and I read it when I was young. But like the idea that like there is this like this magic that everybody's using, and then people can manipulate it. But there's also like these unspoken rules of magic, and like these kinds of things that are like ancient, like time, like love, is going to protect this like a mother's love can protect a child even after she's gone. Is like
and knowing
I think
what we know
great.
about Rowling's own mother dying, I think it makes sense that got into her fiction. That way.
And I love that. I always thought that was really powerful. Yeah, so I was going to ask you before, what did you think about the way that each character kind of gets their moment, but Hermione, like, we can clearly see Hermione's going to be just like this legend. Like, she's going to be either the smartest witch to ever live or like the most powerful or something, because she's like, she everything that she's learned in a finite amount of time. And she's like, they wouldn't have gotten through most of the trials without her. And we continue to see that throughout the series. It's just like
and I love the way she just like, no problem. This is just a logic puzzle. Everything I need to know is right here. Boom, figured it out with the potions. Every sort of this is a very like D&D type ending for me too, with the series of tests in the dungeon. Basically, it's very classic fantasy. So she really is just hitting on like all of these major like tropes, but also like what people like about them. Christmas, I thought it was interesting that they spend Christmas in Hogwarts as well, because to me this novel feels Christmassy in the sense that Christmas, for me at least, as someone who really likes Christmas, is it always reminds me of home. It always reminds me of good times and warmth, and there's sort of a magic to the season, and it sounds silly, but I feel that way. And I think this book, like a lot of those same feelings that I get around Christmas time is what I get reading this.
I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, I feel like this if I was gonna say that a book felt like home, this is it for me. Like you said, and like and what you also touched on, like the idea of the season and the way that it's so interesting, because I feel like Harry Potter is somewhat seen, and a lot of the movies are somewhat seen as like Christmas movies, because Christmas ends up being a big part of some of them, because it's like people are going home, people are staying. And then like it's like when there's less people in the school, like our trio is more willing to do certain things for their research towards whatever's going on, and I don't know. And it's funny that like Harry Potter is now like shown in like marathons around Christmas time and the holidays and stuff, and it's like,
you're right, it has become almost a Christmas movie.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
So I'll definitely want to talk about the ending with Dumbledore talking to Harry about the future and setting up sequels and all of the things to come.
It did feel, I will say, it felt a little anticlimactic to have Harry not, like, he did best Quirrell in some fashion, but a lot of it felt like it was outside of his control. Like he was more of a pawn in Dumbledore's game.
Right. And like that definitely becomes a major point. But I think that a lot of people point out Harry as kind of always just, and I think it's maybe even lampshaded and like addressed in the books, that he kind of just like always luckily makes it out by the skin of his teeth and like figures it out. And like it's like this weird thing, and like there's things around that potentially feel like, unseen hands guiding fate, and like Dumbledore positioning Harry into certain things. But I definitely feel like in this one for sure, that's definitely, I can see that point being like, he didn't do anything, if you know what I mean. He just happened to be there, and then they made the mistake of touching him, and then he kind of used that against them. But
the only reason he got the stone is because Dumbledore cast the spell in such a fashion that would work for him to get the stone. Right. Like,
and it's like, it's funny because it's like, is it Dumbledore being like just like nonchalantly putting a child up against this evil wizard, or is it like this idea that Harry like needs to go through these steps before he can actually fight him, or is it like Harry deserves some sort of revenge or some sort of like, I don't know. There's a lot to be said for Dumbledore's plan going forward, like what's going on here, and also the fact that Harry asks specifically like, I want the details, and Dumbledore's like, that's sorry, the first question you asked me is something that I can't tell you till you're older.
Yeah. So. Well, there's so much that's getting set up for the later series here.
Yeah. So about this, the house cup at the end, Slytherin's won, and then Dumbledore comes in and basically like wipes that away and says like 1,000,000 points to Gryffindor, and Gryffindor's the best, and they win. And I think that's why I get called a fuckboy, because Dumbledore had to play favorites. and give him the house cub.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it is. I mean, but they did courageous things, and we've seen these points get handed out for weird, bizarre reasons and taken away for questionable reasons. And
well, it's just funny that there's even a moment at the end of the book where it's like they all like 50 points, 50 points, 50 points are awarded, and then Harry has a moment where he's like, if only one more point had been awarded, and it's like Neville gets 5 points as well, or 10 points or whatever he gets, and you're just like, of course, yeah. I will say I like book Neville way more than I like movie Neville. Going forward, that's true as well.
Okay, I'll be interested to track that because I've only read the next book and then I haven't read any more of them. So I'm going to be really curious when we get to the point where I'm reading fresh.
I love Neville's arc, and the Neville story is something that I was always super invested in.
Cool. All right, man. Well, I think we should save some of this for the movie episode. We are going to watch the movie and react to it and talk about its history and its creation in our very next episode. So at the very end of the episode, we're going to reveal what our next project is going to be after we finish Harry Potter. But stick around so you can hear that.
Yeah, so this week we want to thank one of our patrons, Mila J. Thank you again for being a patron and supporting this podcast. You're one of the reasons why we're still continuing on right now.
Yeah, thank you to Mila, and thank you to all of our patrons. Honestly, you guys have been great. You really came through for this podcast when we didn't know we were going to be able to continue to do it. But the reason we're still going is because of your continued support. So, yeah, if you want to find out how to support us, go to patreon.com/ink2film. Another way to support us that doesn't require any money at all is leaving us a rating and a review, which would be awesome, especially on iTunes, in which we're getting very, very close. I think we're at 49 out of 50, unless we've gotten it today. Come be that magical 50th review and get us over the hump. It would be amazing.
Also, if you wanted to connect with us, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at Ink2Film. And also, we have a Facebook group called the Council of Inklings that we encourage you to join. We have a lot of discussion there about anything ink or film related. We kind of post a lot of like up and coming projects and questions and polls, things like that.
Yeah, that's been a really happening spot for us. Definitely come check that out. And if you wanted to reach out to us otherwise, you can always send us a email at ink2film@gmail.com or through our website, ink2film.com. And we also have our jukebox directory on there, and you can see like projects that people may be putting tokens towards and stuff that might be coming in the future.
Also, thank you to Goblins from Mars and Empire Sounds for the use of our intro and outro music.
Which was a lot of fun, I gotta say. A lot of fun this week. So I look forward to hearing more of that.
Yep.
All right, so for now we're at the end. We're going to reveal our next project. We are going to do, drumroll, The Godfather, which, if you're like me, you might not have seen. Somehow I missed that. But it is an iconic film, and it's an iconic series. I didn't even know it was based off of a book. It's one of those like Die Hard and some of these other ones we've covered where I didn't even know it was a book. But I'm actually really excited to read it. So we're gonna be hitting that following the next episode. So next episode is still Harry Potter. It's Harry Potter movie. But then right after that, we're starting Godfather. If you guys wanted to get a head start on reading along with us, go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading that. Never read it before, but the movies are legendary. I'm sure everyone knows, and they definitely live up to that hype. So I'm really excited to jump into those.
Me too, man. All right, and until next time.
Thanks for listening.